Hi, and welcome to Far From Home with me, Mabel Ninan, your host. So, I met our guest today, Pirkko Rytkonen, on an online Facebook group. It's an online group for writers. And when she posted about her memoir, something told me that I had to have her as a guest on my podcast because her immigrant experience is intertwined with her love story, with her faith. And I wanted to know more about her and her book. So we're so glad, Pirko, that you are a guest on our podcast, and we're looking forward to learning more about you and your story.
Thank you.
So here's a little bit about Pirkko. Born in Finland, she emigrated to Canada as a child with her family and grew up on the shores of Lake Superior in Thunder Bay. And during her early 30s, their young family transitioned from Canada to the United States, then to Finland and back to Canada. So during her married life, she lived in 3 countries, 7 cities, and 25 dwellings. A retired high school teacher, Pirkko blogs on her website to offer encouragement and hope to others. And in 2023, she published her memoir, Between Us, True Story of Longing for Love and Letters, which was shortlisted for the first 3 chapters by the Word Guild Canada. And we are going to be talking more about her book today. Pirko and her husband have 2 sons and 2 granddaughters, and they live in the Toronto area with her husband of 50 plus years. Welcome again.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here.
So let's start first with a question that I ask almost all my immigrant and refugee guests. Share with us your favorite childhood memory.
Well, I thought I'd share two short ones, one from Finland and one from Canada. I immigrated as a child at 9 years old to Canada with my family. But in Finland, I had started school when I was 6. And my best memory of Finland is my father drove me to school in his motorcycle. So I would sit on the front of the motorcycle and on top of the gas tank, the big tank that's in the front there. I sat in the front and I felt comfortable there. And I was excited to go to school. It was about 3 miles, 3 miles to go to school. So that was one of my favorite memories with my dad in Finland. And the other memory I want to share in Canada, we immigrated in 1960. So we moved to right away when we came from Finland. We went to Saskatchewan, Canada, in the prairies. My husband became, or not my husband, my dad became a farmhand. He worked on a big, large 1,000-acre farm, a wheat farm. So what I did was, again, it's a memory with my dad. My dad took me to the harvester, like the big combine, the harvester out in the big fields, and he let me sit in, or actually, I was just standing and holding on to the steering wheel while he was doing something else. So it was just another time that I was spent time with my dad. And then once the harvesting was done and the truck was full of grains, so we, as kids, we could jump in the grain. It was fun.
Yeah, that sounds like a fun and happy childhood.
Yes, in that time it was. Yes, for sure it was.
And it reminded me, I mean, I was born 1979 in India, and at that time, most of the middle class families owned a two-wheeler, like a scooter.
Yeah.
And the way, my dad would take me and my sister is one of us would stand in the front holding on to the handle, and one would sit at the back. And sometimes all 4 of us, including my mom, would use that as a mode of transport. And
Yeah.
sometimes with our uncles or others who would take us on the motorbike, was also a cheaper way to move around in India. It still is. But as a young kid, we would sit in the front, like you were talking about, on the tank, right?
Yes.
And be careful not to burn our feet.
Yeah.
So that brought back memories for me too. Um, can you talk a little bit about growing up in Canada? as a Finnish immigrant and how it shaped for you because you went at an when you were 9 years old when you went, and that's a very impressionable age. And so, how did that shape the way you saw yourself throughout your childhood and into your teenage years?
Well, I have to say that in general, my childhood was okay and normal and happy, except for the one part that we were immigrants. I was white, and in the time we then from Saskatchewan, we moved quickly to Thunder Bay, which is on Lake Superior in Canada, central Canada. So we lived in Thunder Bay, a small city, and my childhood was fairly like normal at that time and when I was young, went to school. But the difference was that I was an immigrant. I went to school when we got back from Saskatchewan. We only stayed there the summer, came back in September. And then I went to school. And of course, I didn't understand one word of English. And my parents didn't understand English either. And they never did really learn English. So what happened was once I learned English in about, I guess, about a year, I became the translator and always translating for every kind of business my parents had to do. So like they had to go to the bank and they had to do anything that they had to do. I'd be there translating. I was the oldest of 7 children. So I
Wow.
was the more responsible one. And of course I had to do all these things because I was the first one. So what happened then, as I grew up in the culture of Finnish, Thunder Bay is a unique city in Canada because there are a lot of Finnish people that immigrated there from Finland, and they all come there because they want to be where the Finnish people are because they're always joined together. Like we like to be with our kind. So my parents were there too as well, and that's why they moved there because we had all the Finnish people connecting there. So there were so many Finnish people, and the city itself was about maybe 10,000 Finnish people there at that time.
Wow. Hmm.
And there were a lot of businesses that were Finnish in the Finnish language. So the immigrants, when they came from Finland, they had to make a living for themselves. They had to find out how to make a living. My father was a logger or worked in the forest industry, cutting trees and stuff. But a lot of them did. But there was others that started businesses. So there were a lot of Finnish language businesses. So my parents never really had to learn English because they went to the Finnish businesses. And
Hmm.
then also the church. We had several churches, but my own denomination, we had our own denominational church there in Finnish language. And so I lived in that Finnish culture, in that Finnish bubble. I call it a bubble, a
Hmm.
cultural bubble.
Yeah.
And then when I went to high school, that's elementary was a little different because I ended up living, I just realized I went to four elementary schools, 4 elementary schools by the time I graduated grade 8. And then when I went to high school, I did stay in one high school for 5 years. So when I went to high school, again, people from my church, the young people, we were all together, hanging out together. So we didn't, connect so easily with the mainstream of the school life and everything. I didn't participate in the dances or anything else, movies, or I didn't participate in those because, well, there was an unwritten rule about going to dances and going to movies. So in my home and in our Finnish culture, the church culture, I mean.
Yeah.
So yeah, so I did later on, I did, start, connecting with all kinds of other people in the school and in the community. But yeah, even my part-time job was with the Finnish people. I lived in the Finnish community, so they worked in a Finnish restaurant. I was a waitress at that time.
So you were entrenched in Finnish culture more than you were in the Canadian mainstream culture.
Yes.
Yeah.
Slowly it started changing in high school towards the end of high school when I was starting to realize that, hey, I got to do something and going to university and so forth. But yes, mostly in the Finnish Cultural Society, that's where we lived. And then the other thing is, I think at that time I called myself Finnish. Like Finnish Canadian. I
Mm-hmm.
became Canadian citizen when I was 16 because that's when I became naturalized. When my parents, our family became Canadian citizens, but nothing really changed. We were still Finnish.
Yeah, I understand that. I do see as an immigrant myself, a lot of immigrants, tend to stay some those who come from some cultures certainly in their bubbles because it's also more convenient, right? It's also more comfortable. You don't have the awkwardness of making friends or interacting with someone who you fear may not understand you or you fear miscommunication. So, yeah, I
Mm.
understand that. But I think part of your culture was also, like you mentioned, church culture. So, talk to us about your faith because from reading your book, I understand that you were raised in a Christian family and your father was a preacher. And so, how did that affect you? And when did your faith become personal to you?
Yes, you're right. We were in the church culture, the Finnish in our denomination. Actually, my father and mother were actually pioneers to start the Finnish language church. They brought their denomination from Finland and they came over to Thunder Bay because there's so many Finnish people. And so I grew up in that, like pioneer of a new church. And it was in Finnish, and we were having revival, people coming, a lot of Finnish immigrants were coming. So a lot of them came to the church and they got saved, born again. So I lived in that kind of culture in the church all the time. But anyway, I did get saved myself when I was 11 years old. I went to local Pentecostal church kids camp. So that's where I got saved. Again, my identity and my shyness or my feeling not quite fit in as a teenager or as a young person, I didn't quite fit in that Canadian. I didn't know how all that went. Like I didn't eat peanut butter and jam sandwiches. That's one that they had that at the camp, and I didn't like them because we didn't have them. We only had rye bread, so we didn't have
Mhm,
white bread.
mhm,
So that was just a little cultural thing. But so at the camp there, when there was an altar call, I joined. I wanted to receive Jesus as my savior, but I was too scared and too shy and awkward or whatever. I didn't want to walk up to the altar because everybody was going to the front to the altar. So I just went back to my room and my cabin and I prayed to ask Jesus to come in my heart while I was by myself. And so I was a little afraid to tell anybody, but I did do that. And then, but later on, when I was about 15, I got water baptized and received, made it my public declaration of my faith as a Christian. And then I was involved in the church a lot. I taught Sunday school. I did whatever needed to be done. I was there. I arranged Mother's Day programs, Father's Day programs. I shared my story in the church. I gave my testimony anyway. So I was involved very much in the church. Whenever they had meetings, I was there.
mhm. Yeah. And so you had a good spiritual foundation and a foundation that also, I think, inspired you, motivated you to serve and belong to a church, to participate in a church. And that's really, a blessing to know that, faith is not just a personal thing, but it's something that we do in community.
Hmm.
Um, so now let's get to the interesting and the fun part, your love story. Tell us about your love story and how did you meet your husband, Antti, which is spelled Antti, correct? Yeah. So how did that come about? And tell us the journey because I know that it was a long distance relationship for quite some time and you are both different people as well. And he's from Finland and now you're living in Canada. So talk to us about that.
Well, yes, like you said, I was so serving and involved in the church, and I went to every meeting. I love prayer meetings. I loved going to prayer meetings. So one night we were walking to the prayer meeting from my house, about 20 minutes from my house, and then I got there, and a woman she was 10 years older than I was, but I was friends. We were all friends. We were like a family in the church, like 50 to 60 people. So we were all friends. So she was this lady who had been to Finland, and So she came to me outside the church and she said, you know what? I was going to the prayer meeting and then she said, I received this letter from in the mail from a guy in Finland who wants to write to someone in Canada to practice his English or learn English or practice it. And she gave me the address. And so what I did was I went home after the meeting or was it the next day? I went home and I thought, okay, well, what does it hurt? I'll write this guy. That's going to be okay. I'll just write him a letter. And so I wrote the letter, but at the same time that summer, that was in June. So I had already been booked on a flight to go to Finland to visit my relatives. By supernatural miracle, I had received a free ticket from an older man who had a ticket to go to Finland, but he could not go. So what happened was he was giving me, so he asked if I wanted to go to Finland. I said, of course I want to go to Finland. I had been there when I was 17. So this would be at age 19. I was going to Finland. And so I want to visit my relatives again. So I was given a free ticket. So it was a free gift. It was so supernatural. And I took that address and wrote the letter and I got on the plane, went to Finland. And in the letter I had written to this young man in a seminary. He was in Bible college, or they call it seminary in Finland. So I had said that I was going to be coming to Finland to visit my relatives, but I'm also going to come to this conference that is scheduled to be in South Finland in a city called Lahti, which happened to be his hometown. And he was in Bible college, so he was interning as a summer student for the Finnish Free denomination, or the denomination that I was in. So he was there too. And then, I don't know, just suddenly I was at this conference. My mother and sister were also in Finland, so we were together. So all of a sudden I was at this conference, and in between services, I hear this loud call on the speakers. And I hear a loud voice, first of all, a very strong baritone voice.
Mhm.
And calling my name. And I thought, oh my goodness, what is this? I wonder what that is. I don't know what's going on. I haven't done anything and I haven't met anybody. I don't know anybody here other than my family. So then I realized I started walking towards the noise or the voice, not the noise, but the voice going up towards the tent or the front of the tent. It was between services. So in between services, I walked to the front and I saw there was a young guy standing on the platform with a microphone in his hand. And I realized, oh my goodness, this is the guy that I wrote the one letter to, because he knew I was coming. So he was working there. So he called me and we met. That's how we met for the first time. We just said hi and hello and shook hands like they do in Finland. And that was it.
How did you continue your friendship with him? When did it lead to, becoming more than friends?
Well, it didn't lead to anything at that point, other than it led to the fact that I continued writing letters.
Mm. Yeah.
And we continued writing letters and we continued writing letters like that for another, well, after that, when I met him for a few minutes, we continued writing letters for 2 years.
Mm-hmm. And then what changed? Okay, let me ask you this. So during the time that you were writing letters, did you develop feelings towards him, or you were not sure about, where this was going? What was going on in your mind?
Well, actually, to tell you the truth, I was 19, and then until the age of 21, we were writing these letters. I didn't really have any indication of my feelings, other than I just felt that he was more like my soulmate. We became friends. We were friends, and then I would share him stuff that was going on in our church in Thunder Bay in Canada, and I was trying to look for my own pathway, my own plan. Which way was I going to go? So I wasn't really thinking about that this could lead to anything other than friendship. But later on, I think he was thinking maybe a little bit more later. But in the beginning, and then once we got to write more letters, it was like every week or every week or every second week, we'd be getting letters all the time. all the time. Sometimes I miss a letter and he'd be writing faithful, and miss the letter once and he'd write faithful. But it became almost like a situation where, because he was a little bit older than I was, and he was in Bible college and I was still in high school that last year, one more year to go. And when we started, so I was seeking my direction in my life. What should I do? My goal. I wanted to please God. I wanted to serve God. I wanted to, serve God in some capacity. And he became almost my counselor, and I was the counselee.
Mhm.
I shared my fears, and I shared my confusion and anxieties with him, and so that's how it developed.
When did you know that this is the right person for you?
Well, after the 2-year period, he came to Canada, and because he was just entering he had one more year of Bible college to go. So he was just coming to Canada for the summer. Somehow my pastor from my own church in Canada had connected with people, all the pastors and ministers, they were always in connection in the same denomination. So they knew everything. So our pastor had had left that summer and resigned or left the church that summer. And my auntie was coming to Canada for that summer just to intern in the church. Or it turned out to be that he was the intern. That's not why he came. He came to learn English. But I told him, well, how are you going to learn English in Thunder Bay? Because everybody speaks Finnish. You're not going to be able to practice a lot of English because we
Yeah.
all speak Finnish, and it's a Finnish church. But he wanted to come and learn English. And he did go to English school that summer, but he also interned in the church, and he became a pastor for the summer. And how did I know? Well, the church was 10 years old at that time. They were having our 10th anniversary services for the weekend, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. And he arrived, the first service that he was speaking at was on Friday night. I had not seen him before that. I just went to the church because I knew he was there. He was staying somewhere else. He came there to speak, and that Friday or that weekend, as I was going to every service, I didn't miss a service. I started feeling, yeah, this guy's for me. I think if he doesn't ask me out, well, I don't care. I'm not going in. I'm not going out with anybody. So, in other words, in that weekend, I just realized that yeah, I really like this guy.
All right, that's interesting. And we're going to end part 1 of your story right here, and we'll pick it up in the next episode. Thank you so much for staying with us, Pirkko.
Thank you so much.